winner. Listen to what he had to say about getting that winning call.
Hi, I'm David from Kent and I won £15,000 and he couldn't have come at a better time. I was gobsmacked. What have you got to lose for what it costs? In fact, I've done it again this week, so I'd recommend it to anybody.
For another chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash, text cash to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2 or post your name and number to GB07 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 30th of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
As time passes,
she could have said Storm. You made my argument for me.
My guest and I tackle the issues that really matter with a sharp take on every story.
Went everywhere.
something practical could be done.
Or I can become something different.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Good evening. This time last night, Britain was battening down the hatches as up to 100 major riots were expected, but it simply didn't happen. Was the whole thing a huge, gigantic, expensive hoax? And Stormont was recalled today. Yes, Northern Irish politicians having their chance to debate the troubles that have been going on in Belfast, which have replicated much of what we've seen across the rest of the UK and indeed in the Republic over the course of the last year. If they can have a debate, why on earth can't we? And if you are somebody who's very worried about global warming and a fan of net zero, I've got real bad news for you. Coal is making a dramatic comeback. But before all of that, let's get the news with Cameron Walker.
Thanks, Nigel. Good evening. It's 7 o'clock. I'm Cameron Walker here in the GB newsroom. The final child injured in the Southport stabbings has been discharged from hospital and will continue her recovery at home, according to Merseyside Police. 6-year-old BB King, 9-year-old Alice de Silva Aguiar and 7-year-old Elsie Stancombe died after a mass stabbing at a Taylor Swift-themed dance class in the seaside town last week. The family of the injured victim, discharged today, expressed gratitude to the Royal Manchester Children's Hospital for its support and care during what they called this challenging time. Meanwhile, 2 rioters have each been sentenced to 2 years and 8 months in prison for violence disorder on Merseyside. 43-year-old John O'Malley admitted violent disorder, while 69-year-old William Morgan admitted to violent disorder in possessing an offensive weapon. More than 50 police officers were injured as protesters hurled bricks, lit fires and threw bottles a day after the Southport attacks. In London tonight, the Prime Minister is chairing another Cobra meeting with law enforcement officials to reflect on last night and plan for the coming days, the third high-level gathering of its kind in the last week. He's been joined by senior ministers, including the Home Secretary Yvette Cooper, who said the ramped-up police response to potential further riots would continue and suggested it was having an impact on stemming days of disorder. Police had expected more than 100 events and deployed thousands of officers. The Prime Minister also said earlier today the additional police presence is having an effect.
The most important lesson is for those involving themselves in disorder, because what we've seen is that those that are being arrested now, numbered in their hundreds, many have been charged, some already in court, and now a number of individuals sentenced to terms of imprisonment. That is a very important message to those involved in disorder.
And police have ramped up efforts to pursue rioters as the total number of arrests rises to 483. Charges total 149, with that figure expected to rise significantly as investigations continue. The Met's police made 10 arrests over the violent disorder outside Downing Street last week, launching raids in London this morning. And a suspended Labour councillor has been arrested after footage emerged of him online in which he allegedly incited the murder of anti-immigration protesters. Met police officers say they arrested a man in his 50s at an address in south-east London under the Public Order Act. He is in custody at South London Police Station. A Labour Party spokesperson previously told GB News his alleged actions are completely unacceptable and it will not be tolerated. A second Greater Manchester police officer is under criminal investigation for assault after an incident at Manchester Airport last month. It comes after a video emerged of a man appearing to be kicked and punched by a police officer inside a terminal building. The Independent Police Watchdog had previously announced a constable was under criminal investigation, but says it's since received a further referral of complaint. The second officer is also being investigated for potential gross misconduct for alleged breaches of police professional standards, including use of force. NHS waiting lists have risen for the third month in a row, according to new figures. Health Secretary Wes Streeting claims the numbers confirm, and I quote, 14 years of Conservative neglect has left the NHS broken. But there was a sharp decline in the number of people waiting the longest to start treatment. Today, he's spoken of GPs' threats to take strike action.
I think collective action at this stage would not only hurt patients, it would also put more pressure on other parts of the NHS when, frankly, as a whole NHS team, we need to pull together so we can take the NHS from the worst crisis in its history to getting it back on its feet and making sure it's fit for the future.
A Banksy artwork has been removed from an area in South London less than an hour after it was unveiled. The silhouette of a wolf howling on a satellite dish was posted to the Bristol-based artist's Instagram this afternoon, but a number of men took it from a roof in Peckham, pushing a passerby who challenged them with a ladder. It's unknown where the artwork has been taken. And finally, Great Britain's Ellie Aldridge has become the first ever Olympic gold medalist in kite surfing at today's event in Marseille. The discipline, which sees competitors fly above the water at up to 40 knots, powered by huge kites, is making its Games debut this year. 27-year-old Aldridge from Dorset powered her way to gold by winning both races in the final series today. Well, those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Cameron Walker. Now it's back to Nigel.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Lunchtime yesterday, I heard there were going to be 39 major protests around the country, all of which could lead potentially to violence and riots. Crikey, I thought. That's a very big number. By the time I left here last night at 8 o'clock, we were told there could be up to 100 of these major protests, with up to 30 planned counter-protests going to take place across the country. And Britain was literally battening down the hatches. There were market towns in England where GP appointments had been cancelled all afternoon. Hospitals had been reducing their services. Retailers were closing shops, spending money on wood and boarding up their premises. And then what happened? Well, not really very much at all. And it kind of turns out that there was a post on a Telegram group saying, you know, it's time to mask up and go out there and do your stuff. It turned out that organisations that call themselves anti-fascist groups were very mobilised and organised with their printed banners, and they turned up in big numbers in Walthamstow and I think in Brighton and many other parts of the country too. And kind of, you know, think about it, really, one of the biggest policing operations we've ever seen. Goodness knows what the cost of this whole thing was. Was it some gigantic, enormous, expensive hoax? Love to get your thoughts. Farage at GBNews.com. But, you know, it's funny, if you looked at the media today, especially the BBC, etc., you would have thought, well, it's absolutely marvellous, isn't it, that all these wonderful people have come out onto the streets to stop this beastly behaviour that we've seen over the last week. And I have no doubt the vast majority of those that did turn out on these so-called counter-protests genuinely wanted to see peace, law and order and decency returned on our streets. But what I've learned, very much to my cost over the years, is those people, the Be Kind Brigade, aren't always quite as kind as you may think. This was a speech given in Walthamstow last night.
We've got children and women using those trains destroying the summer holidays. They are disgusting, nasty bastards, and we need to coal their throats and get rid of them all. I just want to say thank you all. I'm going to leave it now. And free! 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 Palestine! Free! Free! Palestine! Free! Free! Palestine! Thank you. God bless you all.
Before I comment on that, I'm going to throw back to our newsreader, Cameron Walker, with an update from the USA.
Thank you, Nigel. Well, we're just going to cross live to Florida, where former President Donald Trump is holding a news
somebody
conference.
that hasn't received one vote for president, and she's running, and that's fine with me. But we were given Joe Biden, and now we're given somebody else. And I think, frankly, I'd rather be running against somebody else. But that was their choice. They decided to do that because Kamala's record is horrible. She's a radical left person at a level that nobody's seen. She picked a radical left man that is, he's got things done that he has positions that are just not, it's not even possible to believe that they exist. He's going for things that nobody's ever even heard of. Heavy into the transgender world, heavy into lots of different worlds having to do with safety. He doesn't want to have borders. He doesn't want to have walls. He doesn't want to have any form of safety for our country. He doesn't mind people coming in from prisons, and neither does she, I guess, because she's not, she couldn't care less. She's the border czar. By the way, she was the border czar 100%. And all of a sudden, for the last few weeks, she's not the border czar anymore, like nobody ever said it. And I just hope that the media becomes more diligent, more honest, frankly, because if they're not going to be honest, it's going to be much tougher to bring our country back. We have a very, very sick country right now. You saw the other day with the stock market crashing. That was just the beginning. That was just the beginning. It's going to get worse. It's going to get a lot worse, in my opinion. And fortunately, we've had some very good polls over the last fairly short period of time. Rasmussen came out today. We're substantially leading, and others came out today that we're leading, and in some cases substantially. I guess MSNBC came out, or CNBC came out also with a poll that was, has us leading, and leading fairly big in swing states. In some polls, I'm leading very big in swing states because they want safety. People want safety. They want security. They want respect all around the world for our country. They don't want this horrible culture that is developing, a culture of no common sense. It's really a culture of no common sense, and it's not what anyone wants. We want to have a safe country. We want to have a strong military. We want low interest rates, and we want to be able to have the American dream. We want to be able to have our youth be able to buy homes, housing, get good jobs. And we're really just at the opposite right now. It's so sad to see. But as a border czar, she's been the worst border czar in history, in the world history. I think the number is 20 million, but whether it's 15 or 20, it's numbers that nobody's ever heard before. 20 million people came over the border during the Biden-Harris administration. 20 million people, and it could be very much higher than that. Nobody really knows what the number is. Nobody knows. Nobody has a clue. And the gotaways, they call them the gotaways. The gotaways are at numbers. Somebody was quizzing me on it the other day. No, I don't think so, sir. I don't think so. They have no idea what those numbers are, but they're much higher than you would think. Just like far more people were killed in the Ukraine-Russia war than you ever report. Just like the October 7th would have never happened. Russia would have never hit Ukraine had the election result been called differently. It was a very bad call, but Russia would not have attacked Ukraine. October 7th in Israel would have never happened. You wouldn't have inflation. A lot of great things would have happened. But now you have millions and millions of dead people. And you have people dying financially because they can't buy bacon, they can't buy food, they can't buy groceries, they can't do anything. And they're living horribly in our country right now. With all of that being said, I think it's very important to have debates. And we've agreed with Fox on a date of September 4th. We've agreed with NBC, fairly full agreement, subject to them, on September 10th. And we've agreed with ABC on September 25th. So we have those 3 dates, and those networks, they're very anxiously awaiting that date and those dates. So we have September 4th, September 10th, and September 25th. We have spoken to the heads of the network, and it's all been confirmed, other than some fairly minor details. Audience, some location, which city would we put it into, but all things that will be settled very easily, I think it'll be very easy. The other side has to agree to the terms. They may or may not agree. I don't know if they're going to agree.
Former President Trump there speaking in Mar-a-Lago, Florida, where he warns that the US is heading towards depression. He also warns that we are very close to a world war and confirms that he has agreed to a number of TV debates in the run-up to the election. Now it's back to Nigel Farage.
I'm joined in the studio by Lloyd Rossomore, former MP for Brighton and Hove, and Kwasi Kwarteng, former Chancellor of the Exchequer, former MP and former Energy Minister, which will be relevant later on this evening in the show. OK, so what Trump was saying there, Lloyd, was there are 3 potential big public debates. That must be a good thing, mustn't it? Because I'm not sure the American public have seen that much of Kamala Harris.
Well, she has been their vice president for the last 4 years.
I know, and yet.
Yes, right. but your point is taken. I think that will be very interesting. I can't see why the Democrats wouldn't accept those 3 dates. I think I was listening to that there, and he was sounding now like the slightly doddery old man. And what Kamala needs to do is come above that, not try and go on that level, and seem the young, dynamic, forward-looking person. If she doesn't do that, and she ends up looking worse off against Trump, then they will be in very big trouble. But I think that there is more opportunity there for the Republicans, for the Democrats and Kamala than there is for Donald. But you never know how these things go.
No. I mean, Kwasi, the one thing you can tell, I think it's pretty obvious. Donald Trump would much have preferred Joe Biden to stay in place.
I mean, that's the problem his campaign has had, because they've essentially focused all their guns, their ammunition, if I could use that metaphor, on Joe Biden. And, of course, he's been substituted at the last minute by a very different sort of character in terms of profile, in terms of demographics. And I think that they're struggling to adjust. I suspect Trump will win. I still think he'll win. But I think it's a much more challenging prospect for him than it was.
Yeah, but it also makes the debates really genuinely interesting. I mean, Lloyd makes the point she's been the VP for 4 years, but she's been pretty invisible.
Well, that's the thing that presidents often do. They try and keep the VP, in a box because they don't want to be overshadowed by the vice president. But then, of course, Biden, I think, wanted to run again. We all know that. His debate was disastrous.
The question is, will the electorate believe that they've not seen anything of her, or will they believe she was busy in the background and she's got a track record? And that's all down to the Democrats and how they sell her.
Do you know what? It depends how she performs.
Yeah.
I think suddenly these debates take on an enormous significance. I think it's a good thing. Back briefly to where we were, I showed you that clip, the man who was making those very, very unpleasant comments. His name is Ricky Jones. Labour councillor. I'm pleased to say he has now been removed as a Labour councillor and subsequently arrested. But interesting, isn't it? You know, despite what he said, horrible things that he said, big applause from the crowd. And free Palestine. What the hell has free Palestine got to do with the events of this week? Lloyd, you were in Brighton last night. I think there were about sort of 4 protesters and a couple of thousand counter-protesters. What, I mean, how well organised was the so-called counter-protest? Clearly quite big.
Well, I think, first of all, I don't think it was not a hoax that people were putting out that they were going to turn up. Some people did turn up. It wasn't a hoax that these places had been identified. But clearly, the idea that the far-right rioters and people who've been terrorising the streets are organised is not true. What it is that there are a band of people who are running around causing mayhem, inspired by a lot of people on social media. I'm afraid some of your comments that have been spun out, and you've had
in the most disgusting
and you've
way.
had those discussions. I think that probably you should have moderated some of those comments, and you have noticed, and you have quite rightly said that you got waylaid by certain bits of information.
No. Look, all I asked for was I wanted to know the identity of the man that could have murdered those children.
And as you know, there are many reasons why the police can't do that, including when someone's under 18.
But in the end they did.
And in the end they did because they went to the court, and the court allowed the person's name to be released. But you were asking the police to break the law because they would have had to release it before they went to court to release a minor's name.
I didn't.
And
I didn't know he was 17.
No,
I didn't know
but
anything.
you know that there are laws that mean that police can't release names immediately for many different reasons.
Well,
You're a clever enough man to know that.
Do you know
Nigel.
what?
And the fact that you then doubled down on it, rather than saying, hands up, actually, I was wrong there, I was wrong about that, and actually what I should have done is told people, take a breather, we'll find this in good time, and actually what's important is you don't suddenly conflate
The world has
things.
changed. To take a breather actually was a disaster. And the reason is,
suggesting that.
Out there were all sorts of theories speculating.
Exactly right.
The Southport riots happened on the scale they happened because of the lack of information. And I think the police, I think ministers, given we're in a social media age, need to rethink how we put information out.
That is a fair point. That is a very fair point. But
the game has
that's the
changed.
point that you should have expressed, not police tell us, knowing that the police can't currently tell you. If you'd gone out in Parliament and said, actually, I think that this has been exaggerated because we couldn't tell, we need to review the rules and laws which don't allow us to do this immediately. I think that would have been a very fair point.
Do you know, when the London Bridge attack happened, within an hour we knew the person had been on.
Because they weren't under 18. But I think what we've seen this weekend, or this last day, is clearly it's not organised, but these were real targets that were being circulated online.
Sure.
But there were far too many, and there aren't that many fascists and far right in this country to ever cover the hundreds.
I think that's the real point.
And then I think on the other side of the argument, what is clear is the country broadly, ordinary people in this country, are a bit fed up with their shops being smashed up and people running amok in their country. And so what they've done is come out in large numbers, and organisations like Hope Not Hate, of course, let me just finish, because your accusation is that they've printed these...
Hope Not Hate. Hope Not Hate are an anti-fascist organisation who target conservatives and reform.
But these organisations have banners around stopping racism that are in warehouses because they do anti-racism marches and demonstrations very regularly. The idea that they had kind of planned it for this day, I think is totally
they
wrong.
were well organised.
They were well organised.
Quasi, the truth is, yes, we do have, you can call it the football hooligan wing or whatever you want, and that exists, but it is actually very small, isn't it?
I agree. I think it's exaggerated to make a political point. And I also feel that the underlying causes of the riots, and this is a point you've made, I've made it, other people have made it, people aren't looking at that.
No.
So it's all been about, essentially, the far right and thugs. And there's also an element of criminality. There are people who are not remotely political.
And looting going on.
All of that. And then we've got to actually consider, it was crude, some of it was violent, but there's genuine concerns, and you'll know this as an MP, I certainly knew it representing my seat, about the levels of immigration, and that's an important part of the debate.
Yeah, there is. I'll tell you what, I'm going to have to call time there. In a moment, we'll talk to Dame Arlene Foster, because Stormont was recalled today to have a proper debate about this, and yet we can't have a debate in Westminster. I wonder why.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
We got an incredible story this week of a young teenager who has raised more than £5,000 for charity.
13-year-old, just 13 years old, Cameron Hutchison cycled the West Highland Way with his dad, Colin, in just 25 hours, raising money for international food charity Mary's Meals. And the 96-mile route took Cameron and Colin to the foot of Ben Nevis.
Wow. Now, the organisation provides daily school meals to more than 2.4 million children in countries such as Syria, Haiti and Malawi.
We are delighted to be joined now by cyclist and fundraiser Cameron Hutchison. Cameron, it's so lovely to have you here. How are you today?
I'm very good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, very well.
Well, we're
you.
very impressed to have you. We are honoured to have you. First of all, do you like cycling?
Yeah, it's one of my favourite sports, so yeah, I just wanted to do that.
What kind of bike did you do that enormous distance in? Did you have a special bike? Was it adapted?
Well, it was my cross-country bike that I just normally use for cross-country races. So, yeah.
Wow.
You can actually see it on the screen there with the blue handlebars. That's the bike I was using.
We can, and quite a route you went on as well. So, Cameron, you're 13 years old. When did you start cycling?
I've sort of been cycling my whole life. So I got a little red balance bike when I was maybe 3 or 2, maybe. And then I kind of just got bigger bikes as I went on.
GB News, the People's Channel. Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm joined down the line by Dame Arlene Foster, the former First Minister of Northern Ireland. Stormont, Arlene, was recalled today. Some pretty extraordinary scenes in the last week. Yes, horrible, violence, arrests, intimidation. And yet, when I see people from both divides of the community marching arm in arm in the streets of Belfast with their own flag, something quite big is happening there, isn't it?
Well, it's lovely to be with you, Nigel, and to reflect on what's been going on in Northern Ireland over this past week or more. I think it was right to call the Assembly on reflection today to have a debate. Many times we're called back to debate issues, but I think it was right to call it today. First of all, of course, to reject the violence and the thuggery and the looting that took place in many areas of our city, our great capital city, over this past few days. And some of the MLAs were also gracious enough to understand that there's something else going on, that in some of the areas of Belfast, there are real concerns that need to be addressed. And I think that those concerns haven't really got an airing. They need to get an airing and they need to be listened to. Of course, you have to protect the ethnic minority communities. Of course, you have to protect their businesses. You have to make them feel that they're welcome. You have to say to the healthcare workers that they're doing a great job in many of our hospitals. But you can protect and listen as well. And I think what we need to do is absolutely listen to some of those concerns that have been raised with many people over this past number of days. And I really object to labelling everybody as racist, as Nazi scum, which has been labelled at some working class people in Belfast. I totally reject that. Of course, there are people who are going to travel to engage in violence. And indeed, unfortunately, Nigel, I have to say as well that some of the paramilitaries are seeing it as an opportunity for them to gain control again. And that's absolutely to be rejected. But that doesn't take away from the fact that, of course, we need a police presence. We need a police reaction to what's going on. But we also need to listen. And goodness, if Northern Ireland can tell us anything about what's going on. It's that we need to listen to some of those real and genuine concerns that are there.
Arlene, thank you very much indeed for summing that up so beautifully for us. I'm joined in the studio by Stephen Pound, who, of course, a former Shadow Minister of Northern Ireland. Arlene made the point there that I thought was very relevant, that some of the paramilitary-type operations who've been dormant but not dissolved completely.
If only they had been dormant, Nigel. I'm sorry, there's a very serious ongoing investigation at the moment. There's a person was lifted today, he's in the Musgrave, in the Derry Strabane region. There have been 3 people arrested. There's some serious things happening. Look, John Boucher, the Chief Constable, who you know, has issued a statement today warning of unrest tomorrow. And this is, I know this is not the same thing that you were referring to last night about, you know, panicking, everything. This is actually cold intelligence. Because what First Minister Arlene Foster actually rightly says is that the paramilitaries will seize the vacuum and they will move into it. But the first thing you have to remember when you talk about your substantive question, why Stormont has been recalled and why not Westminster? Look, every single article, every single book about jurisprudence and policing in the United Kingdom has to have a sentence at the end of it saying, not in Northern Ireland. The police force is entirely different. They're armed, they wear a different uniform. And the population of Northern Ireland is under 2 million. It's about half a dozen London boroughs. So you have much more direct control from Stormont of the policing through the police board than you do in this country.
That's a good point. That's a good point. But don't you think, given the level of concern and the level of violence we've seen here over the course of the last week, that it would have been useful for Westminster to be recalled?
I think it would have been a gesture, Nigel, and you're not, one for that. I think what we need to do is to actually realise that some of the Metro mayors of both parties are the key people here, and I think the Metro mayors in Liverpool, district and in Manchester, they're the ones who actually should have come to the fore in this. And I think had Parliament been recalled, and I was in Parliament for years, I think we got recalled about 3 or 4 times. We got recalled in 2011 when we had the riots in London. I know. Yeah, we did. Well, that was it was completely out of control. I think what's happened here is, incidentally, Keir Starmer was the DPP in 2011, and I wish he'd acted a little bit more robustly then, but that's water under. Look, what's happening here is anything that detracts from what the government is doing, I think, is actually not actually doing the country any good. We have got a grip on this, I think, by acting very, very robustly. And when you see, 4 people on a traffic island representing... But the other interesting thing is, if I may say, the story that you broke a couple of hours ago about Ricky Jones, who's fortunately he's now had the Labour whip removed from him, talking about slitting throats, talking about Palestine, surrounded by people clapping and cheering. You just realise that this actually does need a direction from the national leadership as well as from the local.
Well, and that's why I think actually Parliament would have been useful to be recalled. But going back to Northern Ireland, it's very interesting. You've got Irish nationalists literally arm in arm in the street with unionists saying levels of immigration are too high in Northern Ireland. Over the last year in the Republic, these protests have been regular and fires have been, fires outside hotels, and so a lot been happening, which we've been ignoring completely.
I don't think we've been ignoring it in the Irish press.
Well, no, but I think mainstream British media have not been talking about this.
I think you're right there. I mean, we've had a particularly horrible murder, with a young woman in... who was actually murdered by somebody who was an immigrant. You have issues like that. But I think First Minister Arlene Foster and I have been to many, many funerals in our time. And I remember one we did go to was of Leah McKee, who was murdered during a demonstration in Derry. It's a different scale. When you talk about riots in Northern Ireland, guns are involved.
Are you fearful? See, with your experience and your knowledge of Northern Ireland, are you fearful?
To be honest, I don't want to be alarmist, but I am fearful, simply because tensions are running very high. I never would have thought that the scenes we saw in Dublin a couple of months ago would have taken place. Dublin and Ireland, the Republic, had a reputation of being a very tolerant, very welcoming place. Because it's a country that knows a lot about immigration. And what we actually saw on the streets and in a couple, and in Limerick and Tipperary, various other places, was deeply, deeply worrying. But the thing that worries me the most, Nigel, is that always in Northern Ireland there is the potential for something worse.
And that's
because Northern Ireland is not like GB.
Right. No. Very strong point. Well made, as ever. Stephen Pound, thank you very much indeed. In a moment, we discuss the Taylor Swift concert that was cancelled for fear of a terrorist attack. Could it potentially have been something like the Ariana Grande concert that we saw a few years ago in our country? And what potentially does it mean for us?
Good evening. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update brought to you from the Met Office. The grey weather will linger across the south first thing tomorrow, but in general, it's looking much brighter as we head into Friday. That's because a cold front will clear through the country overnight tonight and into tomorrow morning, introducing fresher air. But before then, we've still got the milder, humid air through the rest of this evening and overnight. So quite a close night to come. Persistent rain still continuing through this evening across northeastern areas, but that will linger across the south and east until Friday morning, making for a fairly grey start here tomorrow morning. Temperatures already in the high teens as well. Slightly fresher further north for much of Northern Ireland and Scotland, and here there will be plenty of sunshine, or more in the way of sunshine compared to today at least. Still a few showers though, potentially some heavier ones affecting the Northern Isles first thing tomorrow. They could push into parts of south of western Scotland as well, but it does look like it will remain largely dry across Northern Ireland, eastern areas of Scotland, the southeast as well. Northeastern England not looking too bad, as well as Wales and the southwest. Plenty of sunshine first thing, and it's going to be turning much brighter across the southeast towards lunchtime as well, once that rain does clear away. So certainly a brighter day to come tomorrow, and it will feel fairly warm in the sunshine as well. However, across the far north, that's where we've got a bit of a breeze and this risk of showers through the day. So here still that fresher feel, temperatures in the mid-teens, but further south we're towards the mid-20s. So not feeling too bad, especially where the winds remain light. Another change on the way as we head into the weekend. Another band of rain arrives across parts of England and Wales, bringing outbreaks of rain showers continuing across Scotland. But it will brighten up for many areas into the afternoon, and again feeling fairly warm in the sunshine too. But it's Sunday and Monday when the temperatures really start to climb. Plenty of sunshine around through these days and temperatures towards the low 30s.
I'm Patrick Christys. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threats on.
As time passes,
She could have said storm. You made my argument for me.
My guests and I tackle the issues that really matter, with a sharp take on every story.
Went everywhere.
Something practical could be done.
Or I can become something different.
Patrick Christys tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Well, a lot of very disappointed people. They got their Taylor Swift tickets to go to see her in Austria, and it was cancelled for fear of a terrorist threat. Well, to give us a bit more detail on that is friend of the programme, Chris Phillips, former head of the National Counter-Terrorism Security Office. Chris, we've all been rather obsessed with what's been happening in the United Kingdom over the course of the last few days. Give us the lowdown, please, on what's happened here.
Well, I mean, it's just a reminder, really, that terrorism and Islamic State terrorism, especially, is still a major issue right across Europe. And what we've seen today is 2 young men, radicalised online by the sound of it, who intended to blow up and kill as many people at a music concert, a Taylor Swift concert in Vienna. And you know, it could easily have been successful. They were clearly making a bomb out of TATP by the looks of it, and also had the intention to kill people with knives and guns and things. So, listen, this threat is still there, Nigel, as you very well know, and it's a problem right across Europe.
Yeah, it really, really is. And, I mean, clearly a success for intelligence in Austria. Do we know whether this was...
But I think it... Yeah, I think it was actually from the US, the intelligence, probably from the Five Eyes. I do know for a fact that the Five Eyes have more intelligence about what what's going on across Europe than they do themselves. And I think it was US intelligence that probably tipped off the authorities in Vienna. But however it was done, it's been dealt with very well. Hopefully they've got everyone involved and there's no one else lingering, waiting to attack. But I think Taylor Swift's management team probably, after the incident in Southport, I think they would probably be a bit concerned about another incident linked to their superstar.
Chris Phillips, thank you very much indeed. Lloyd, I've been saying for some time that I think a lot of young men crossing the English Channel without identity documents poses a genuine threat to national security, particularly as ISIS boasted in 2015 they would use the Mediterranean route to put their operatives into Europe. And it was interesting in the election campaign that Keir Starmer said he also thought that what was happening in the Channel was a national security crisis. Intelligence succeeded here. I think our intelligence services have thwarted, a good many attempts. Is there anything we can do? Is there anything we can do, the government can do, to stop this?
Well, I think there are things you can try and do to stop homegrown radicalisation, and there are. I know it's controversial, but the Prevent programme has successfully tried to divert people from different forms of radicalisation, and that works. And making sure that we have people in religious settings and people who are leaders who are preaching moderation. I mean, I personally believe these should all be regulated. The state should regulate religion. That's how it should be, not the other way around. And it's quite right that sometimes we step in when you have preachers saying the wrong things. The problem is we're in the World Wide Web world now, and so there's always a limit that any individual state can do. That's why we need strong intelligence, but that's also why we need strong community-led intelligence as well, and that particularly is around police officers and our other intelligence services building up long-term strong relations in communities. And some of that can seem very soft on the front of it. It can seem like youth clubs and youth services, where you then have
prisons
professionals who pick those things up and then feed them to the right things.
I agree with everything you said. But I also accept the fact that, not having secure borders increases the risk. I mean,
isn't that
I don't think anyone disagrees on that.
I think it's a really big issue.
And this was the issue, when I was in Parliament before you arrived, we were bedeviled by this. I mean, this is the whole Rwanda scheme, all of these schemes that we had. And Rishi Sunak actually put it as one of his 5 priorities. And I'm afraid it was one of those ones where we conspicuously failed to deal with it. And I think this is a big problem for the incumbent government.
You were there, Kwasi, you were there all through that period of government.
All through that.
When we saw, persistent threats. OK, one aspect of it is the Channel, but it's not the only aspect of it, by far. Radicalisation in prisons, elsewhere, major problems. Do you think the organisations we have in place, the Prevent programme, etc., are they doing their job properly?
So look, I think it's a mixed picture. I think some of the institutions we have are amazing in terms of the intelligence gathering. I was very struck as a cabinet minister when Putin invaded Ukraine. Our intelligence was second to none at that point. But then there are other institutions of the state that aren't working at that level. And I think that it's the job of the politicians to make sure that those institutions are better equipped and better managed to do their job. But there are bits of the British state that are second to none. I think our intelligence...
Well, it's interesting, wasn't it, that Chris Phillips made the point that actually it was probably the Five Eyes intelligence, which is a feather in the cap.
But if we're saying that the border is the problem, then I think the question is what are the solutions? Not to, once they're here, deport them, actually, but to stop people coming over. And I think that does mean that you need to look at processing in other countries, not processing once you get here, fly somewhere around the world. But actually, we've got a processing centre in France. You're in the Channel. We'll take you back straight now to be processed.
I tell you what, 4,000 across the Channel since Keir became Prime Minister. This is a debate that will not go away.
Less than 10 years ago are coming over illegally.
Yeah. Well, they were coming in backs of lorries, and
which was just as dangerous from a security point of view.
Yes, it was. Just this is more visible. In a moment, we debated net zero last night. We had on the programme people who were very pro net zero. In a moment, we're going to talk about the coal comeback. Boris Johnson said it's the end of coal. I don't think so. We'll debate all of that in just a moment. The end of...
Good afternoon, Britain. Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK. From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates.
You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it? Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday, we are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Britain's newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
This cancel culture law. This is Bridget Phillipson, Piers. What is she taking it upon herself to do?
This is the Education Secretary.
Yes,
she's the Education Secretary, and in November, an Act of Parliament was passed, a Freedom of Speech Act, particularly aimed at universities, colleges and students' associations to protect freedom of speech. And Bridget Phillipson, and it's had the royal consent. It's on the statute book, and the law was due to start in the next day or two. But it does need implementation regulation, which she's declined to give, and has said she's going to repeal it. Now, she said all this outside Parliament. She has taken it upon herself, effectively, to repeal an Act of Parliament without the consent of Parliament. It wasn't in the King's speech. And also, this is basically saying it's fine, let's have all this wokery-pokery back in universities and cancelling speakers.
This is why the government brought it forward.
That's why
so many people were being cancelled.
Absolutely.
People
and
like
now
J.K. Rowling, people like that.
Incredibly, the Labour Party have decided to repeal a freedom of speech bill. It is absolutely unforgivable. I mean, Bridget Phillipson, who's also responsible for the ludicrous VAT on public schools, which she's now admitted does mean there are going to be more pupils and more pressure on state schools.
Of course there are.
Instead of actually improving education in this country, everything she seems to be doing is damaging it.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
No, Boris Johnson, it's not the end of coal, quite the reverse. Interesting, Glencore, one of the biggest mining companies in the world, went to their big shareholders in London over the course of the last few weeks and said, shall we divest of our coal mining division? Oh no, said the investors, it's the most profitable bit of your business. Please keep coal. And this is happening. ESG investing, as it was known, is coming to an end as pension funds and others realise that fossil fuels still have a big future, regardless of what we do in this country. One final thought on coal. Think about this. It is projected that in the year 2024, on the planet, we will burn 8.4 billion tonnes of coal. Think about that. 8.4 billion tonnes of coal. More coal than has ever been burnt before. Now, last night I was having a very big debate with environmentalists about net zero and the cost of renewable energy. Here's a little clip. Intermittency and cost are still problems that we haven't yet overcome in any way, have we?
We have overcome it. The intermittency has been handled by a smarter grid. And what that does, two things. It makes it cheaper, and it means we have to build less infrastructure. And what has happened in the last 15 years is the price of renewables they were 15 years ago, you're right, they were expensive. We had to invest in them. Now...
And the poor paid for it.
Now they are cheaper than fossil fuels.
There we are. People speak with great authority on how wonderful and cheap wind energy is going to be, how we can store energy and have a new grid. Well, Lord Ridley, Matt Ridley, wrote a piece in the Telegraph today that I thought was absolutely fascinating. Matt, welcome to the programme. There was a number in your article today that I want you to explain to the great British public. So let's say we become increasingly reliant on wind, but we get a big anticyclone over the North Sea in February and the turbines don't turn. But it's OK, according to the industries, because we can use batteries to store the electricity. You put a number in today's Daily Telegraph as to what that might potentially cost.
Yeah, a battery that can store 12 hours of electricity for the UK, which is a lot, would be £300 billion, right? Now, we can store minutes worth in smaller batteries and so on, but that's pretty expensive too. It's just very difficult to store electricity, and very wasteful, by the way. You put it into the battery, you get out, you don't get as much out as you put in. So that is not really a practical solution to the intermittency problem of solar and wind, which, as you say, on a dark February evening when the wind is still, it can suddenly drop from producing a significant quantity of energy to almost nothing. And so at the moment, we solve that by firing up gas-fired power stations to keep the grid going. But the more wind and solar we put on the grid, the more expensive it's going to be to keep those backup operations ticking over. And by the way, your guest is wrong. It's not cheaper than fossil fuels. There was a couple of years after the Ukraine invasion when the price of wind did become below the price of gas-fired electricity briefly, but it's back above it, significantly above it, particularly offshore wind, way higher than the price of generating electricity from gas. So if we're going to have these gas-fired power stations ready to produce electricity at the drop of a hat when the wind drops, why don't we just use them instead?
So does this mean that Ed Miliband's promise during the election campaign that we would have cheaper energy bills as a result of quadrupling of offshore wind is impossible to achieve?
Yes, it is. It's simply impossible. The price of offshore wind is not coming down. Look at the capex and opex of those companies. So even the hope that it will come down in the future is not looking very rosy. They're not lasting as long. They're not as efficient. The output is not as great as they were hoping. You get big wind droughts. In 2021, they produced only 35% of the time. In 2022, it was 45%. So you get big variations from year to year. So the problem of intermittency has not been solved. You can pump water uphill, but we haven't got enough mountains. You can pump air into caverns underground. We haven't got nearly enough capacity to do that. In the end, the promise of the smart grid was mentioned by your guest last night. That means basically draining your car's battery overnight to help keep the lights on for someone else. Well, that's not going to be very popular with people when you wake up in the morning and find that you can't drive your car because it's flat.
Matt Ridley, thank you very much indeed for coming on and making those points. And never let it be said, folks, that you don't hear all sides of arguments here on GB News. Well, Lloyd Russell Moyle, some really quite strong, I'm going to say facts, put there by Matt Ridley. Intermittency with solar and wind is a massive problem still.
Well, intermittency with solar is not so much of a problem. It's a scheduled intermittency, and whilst there are some days that are a bit more cloudy than other days, broadly, the sun shines at scheduled times, and I can predict when the sun's going to be shining in 2 years' time, in 10 years' time. It's astrology, isn't it? Or it's whatever that movement of the planets is.
But just briefly, the point I was making was the anticyclone in February that sits over the North Sea gives fog as well.
Yes, but broadly, those things are pretty predictable. Wind does have some more intermittency, and that has always been the discussion. And I think the idea that we will have a grid and the use of the grid like we do at the moment if we want to move to renewables, does have to change. That does mean that people, not that you'll have big battery centres per se, but people will have to have batteries in their houses. But the problem is...
It won't be cheaper.
Well, it might be cheaper, but the problem actually, I don't think, is residential. Actually, residential, we can nudge with pricing to get people to do things, or we can get people to draw the energy when it's basically free, and we can then use it overnight and for 12-hour periods. Most people aren't in their home all the time. That's fine. Actually, the problem will be industry. Some of our industries that run 24 hours. Aluminium smelters, for example. We used to have a lovely one up in Anglesey next to the nuclear
Well,
power
actually, let's bring Kwasi in. Let's bring Kwasi in, because
we didn't invest in some of the nuclear.
During your time, we boasted that we reduced carbon dioxide emissions more than anywhere else in the world. We lost the aluminium smelters, we've lost most of our refineries, we've lost most of our chemical industry, and we've lost nearly all of our primary steel. And you guys did this.
It wasn't all about energy costs.
A lot of it was.
There were reasons why those industries either failed or moved on. But the point I was going to make is that we've got to have a balanced system. I don't think anyone, certainly in the department when I was running it and when I was there for 3 years, suggested that we would have an energy system entirely built around renewables. And we looked at modelling. It's way too expensive. And the problem of intermittency, the fact that the sun doesn't shine all the time.
So Miliband's going too far.
So you need a balance. And the opposite of intermittency, what they refer to as baseload, that's continual energy, you need to have that. And you either get that through gas or through nuclear power. And I think one of the things that I think Boris led on, and I was very happy to help him on that, was driving British nuclear.
But that was picking up the pieces of the disaster of the 2010 cancellation of the nuclear power under the coalition government.
Well, I think to be fair, Labour didn't do a very good job on this.
Labour planned, and they all cancelled.
Well, political. Ed Miliband was against nuclear. When he was energy secretary,
he planned
he was against
power stations.
You look at what he said.
You cancelled them.
I tell you what,
he was against nuclear.
I tell you what, I'm more sceptical on net zero than either of these two, I can tell you. But I want to thank them for coming in and being a great panel, because they're energetic and they're lively. We have the kind of debates I think you're having at home or down the pub or wherever you may be, which you don't get on other channels. Now, coming up next is State of the Nation, and tonight it's Christopher Hope. What have we got coming up on the menu?
Nigel, Jacob Rees-Mogg isn't here today. I'm back in for him. We've got Dan Hodges on the issue of the tackling the far right, as the government calls it. Is it the far right or not? And is it far right to be against immigration? Nigel Nelson, our senior political commentator, and Paul Goodman, Lord Goodman, of course, they'll be on the panel. We'll hear from also, they'll be discussing the Labour councillor who'd said, cut your throat to suspend you highlighted him earlier. And Craig McKinley, the Barnett P. It'll be a great show.
Excellent. Very good indeed. Thank you, everybody. I'm off for the next couple of weeks. I'll be back with you before the end of the month. Thank you.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update brought to you from the Met Office. The grey weather will linger across the south first thing tomorrow, but in general, it's looking much brighter as we head into Friday. That's because a cold front will clear through the country overnight tonight and into tomorrow morning, introducing fresher air. But before then, we've still got the milder, humid air through the rest of this evening and overnight. So quite a close night to come. Persistent rain still continuing through this evening across northeastern areas, but that will linger across the south and east until Friday morning, making for a fairly grey start here tomorrow morning. Temperatures already in the high teens as well. Slightly fresher further north for much of Northern Ireland and Scotland, and here there will be plenty of sunshine, or more in the way of sunshine compared to today at least. Still a few showers though, potentially some heavier ones affecting the Northern Isles first thing tomorrow. They could push into parts of south of western Scotland as well, but it does look like it will remain largely dry across Northern Ireland, eastern areas of Scotland, the south east as well. Northeastern England not looking too bad, as well as Wales and the southwest. Plenty of sunshine first thing, and it's going to be turning much brighter across the southeast towards lunchtime as well, once that rain does clear away. So certainly a brighter day to come tomorrow, and it will feel fairly warm in the sunshine as well. However, across the far north, that's where we've got a bit of a breeze and this risk of showers through the day. So here still that fresher feel, temperatures in the mid-teens, but further south we're towards the mid-20s. so not feeling too bad, especially where the winds remain light. Another change on the way as we head into the weekend. Another band of rain arrives across parts of England and Wales, bringing outbreaks of rain showers continuing across Scotland. But it will brighten up for many areas into the afternoon, and again feeling fairly warm in the sunshine too. But it's Sunday and Monday when the temperatures really start to climb. Plenty of sunshine around through these days and temperatures towards the low 30s.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Don't miss out on your chance to win a whopping £30,000 in tax-free cash to spend however you like. It's extra cash that could really make a difference to your coming year. You could find yourself on that holiday you've always wanted to take, buy that treat that always seemed out of reach, or just send some of those day-to-day financial stresses packing. £30,000 could be yours. For another chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash, text CASH to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2. Or post your name and number to GB07, PO Box 8690, Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 30th of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
If you want your news to be straight talking,
this is the nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threats on.
As time passes,
she could have said storm.
You made my argument for me.
My guest and I tackle the issues that really matter with a sharp take on every story.
It went everywhere.
Something practical could be done.
Or I can become something different.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
It's true. You're not wrong. No one will be cancelled.
Lovely. Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news